Big news came last Friday with a report stating that a huge buyout deal is being prepared for EA to go private. This means no more stock market, no more shareholders, and potentially more freedom from this revenue overdrive model. Is it though? Things are now official and an agreement is in place that a buyout of EA will happen, with the new owners being the public investment fund from Saudi Arabia, private equity firm Silver Lake, and Jared Kushner's investment firm called Affinity Partners, who has family ties to the President of the United States, Donald Trump. Now, with all the big business words being thrown around, what is getting lost in the message is what interests me personally the most. And that is, what does this whole thing mean to me as a gamer? I'm not going to get any piece of that $55 billion buyout, but what I want to know is how this new reality will influence my time with the next Battlefield. What does it mean for studios like BioWare, or what will happen to the monetization of games like EA Sports FC? I'm not a business specialist, so please bear that in mind, but I spent some time digging through what's been written online, and I'll try to sort all this into a digestible set of information, give you an idea of who the new owners are, and what could be their level of involvement in EA's future direction. Then we'll see how all of that might affect EA's existing and future pipeline. I will also leave some links in the description if you'd like to get some more takes on the matter. Let's go. Electronic Arts was founded in May 1982 by a former Apple employee, and it started off mostly as a publisher. In time, the company shifted its focus towards having internal game studios, which were mostly acquired and not built from scratch. In 1990, they went public at the stock exchange. Meanwhile, the EA Sports brand was established that still lives to this day and is stronger than ever. Through the years, EA acquired studios like Maxis, BioWare, DICE, and Respawn Entertainment, which all made very successful games. Some of them still do, but now the question remains, what about the ones that don't perform exceptionally well anymore? We'll come back to that though. Throughout the years, EA had various CEOs, and that usually meant a certain vision for the company. For example, back in the day, EA used to make many games based on popular franchises that were licensed to them, and that was Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings with its great Battle for Middle-earth, or even The Godfather. A big change came later, with EA shifting their focus to their own IPs, at the same time signing an exclusivity deal with Disney in 2013 to make Star Wars games for the next 10 years. The current focus is definitely a prioritization of their own IPs, which, apart from the obvious current landscape of EA's games, is also shown via two things. They did not want to extend their exclusivity for the Star Wars brand, or maybe Disney didn't want that to happen, not really happy with how it turned out for them before. But then there's the case of no longer releasing FIFA and instead doing their own football game. I don't think losing a FIFA license hurt the company in the long run. First of all, they now have more freedom over how to approach the game and probably its monetization, but also they have no real competition yet to challenge them at the top of the ball game. So why share money with FIFA when they can limit their spendings and still make heaps of cash? And we finally arrived to now. EA has just released the new FC, the new Battlefield is just around the corner, and players are looking forward to it after the beta. These days, EA's own engine, Frostbite, is used wherever possible, and Andrew Wilson's pockets need to be made to measure every year since the salary is always getting bigger despite the layoffs hitting the industry. Suddenly, last Friday, the news drops that the company is going to be bought out of the stock market by three parties: Saudi Arabia's public investment fund, Silver Lake, and Affinity Partners, while retaining Wilson as the CEO of the company. Why there's no change needed at that position? Well, the reason is pretty obvious, and let me give you a quote by the co-CEO and managing partner at Silver Lake. "We are honored to invest and partner with Andrew, an extraordinary CEO who has doubled revenue, nearly tripled EBITDA, and driven a five-fold increase in market cap during his tenure," which basically means he made a lot of people a lot of money and he made them very happy. Okay, but who are the parties interested in the whole thing? Silver Lake is one of the largest and most renowned tech investors with a long history of acquiring and restructuring companies like Dell or Skype. The company's goal is stated to be creating long-term value, and it often happens through optimizing processes, reducing costs, and cutting off unprofitable or potentially risky business areas. What does it mean in terms of EA? Most probably further layoffs at the company, a thorough review of EA's portfolio from a very business-oriented perspective to cut spendings wherever there's not a lot of profit on the horizon, and probably doubling down on parts of the company that make the most money. And what is that? Well, obviously the whole EA Sports portfolio, mostly FC with the Ultimate Team, but obviously also NFL, then Apex Legends as a successful free-to-play model with paid cosmetics and battle passes, and then there's The Sims with its regularly released paid content, be that bigger expansions or just cosmetics. If I read that correctly, EA's live service games accounted for almost 74% of the company's total revenue in the last fiscal year, so you can clearly see where the money's at and what will be the priority going forward. It's important to note that while an agreement has been reached to have this buyout deal at $210 per share, which means that it's almost $55 billion total, things are not done yet. Do you remember how long and heated the acquisition of Activision Blizzard King by Microsoft was? Well, even though the circumstances are a bit different because it means taking the company off the stock exchange, certain things still have to happen. The deal is expected to close in the first quarter of the 2027 fiscal year, and that means sometime between April and June next year. The deal needs to get an approval from EA's shareholders, but that's why the deal is to offer $210 per share instead of the last market value unaffected by the news dropping, which was $168.3. They call it a premium value to make sure no one from the shareholders feels dissatisfied by what they get, and so that they don't make any problems. The second thing is an approval from antitrust authorities, and that's where Affinity Partners partially comes in. Since the approval process has to happen in various markets, things might get more or less political, depending on the situation. EA is an American company, it has to go through approval either by the FTC or the Department of Justice, but let's not get into details which of these and why. I don't know the American law well enough to be able to state it clearly. However, since Affinity Partners is owned by Jared Kushner, the son-in-law to Donald Trump, we can expect that there won't be any big issues along the way in the US. Then, since a lot of revenue comes from the countries that are part of the European Union, the EU also has to approve this deal, and then all the larger economies in the world depending on their local laws. The former two, however, are the most important ones, and having one of these partners in the mix, the Affinity Partners, is a slight influence over making sure that it goes smoothly, especially if you consider that the third party in the mix, which is the biggest party, is located outside of the US and the EU, and collection of data and players' privacy is an important topic, so the deal should expect a serious number of eyes watching for potential issues very carefully, so every influence helps. And now, the biggest part of the puzzle is Saudi Arabia's public investment fund. Their investment in gaming needs to be considered in a bigger picture because it's not the first and it's definitely not the last. Saudi Arabia has this grand plan called Vision 2030 that focuses on restructuring the kingdom's economy and reducing its dependence on oil. Both sports and esports have been identified as central pillars for this transformation, and that's why the PIF already acquired Scopely, a huge mobile game developer and publisher. It also has a large minority stake in the Embracer Group. They acquired and merged ESL and Faceit, which was huge for esports, and now there's a heavy focus into holding the Esports World Cup annually in the capital of Saudi Arabia. But that's not all, since apparently PIF also has significant minority stakes in Nintendo, Take-Two, so the publisher of GTA, Nexon, and Capcom. But apart from just investing into gaming and making money through this industry, the goal of Vision 2030 is to grow the domestic gaming industry, and that already happens by establishing studios like Steer Studios or the support company like 966, and yeah, then there's the whole Esports World Cup. But again, not everything is just about business. The additional goal is to improve the image of Saudi Arabia, which is often criticized for its human rights record. For example, did you know that women were only allowed to drive there in 2018? Or that many professional fields were closed to them work-wise. It has already started to change since the driving ban was lifted in 2018. Now over 30% of women are working and they are also allowed into the military. Oh, and a ban of over 35 years on having cinemas in the country was also lifted in 2018. The entertainment is back in many forms. The country is definitely trying to get more international approval and to get more tourists to visit, with organizing major events and even stuff like relaxation of the dress code in the country. And to come back to EA with all of this, when you think of how EA's top games are perceived, let's say EA Sports FC and Battlefield that are getting a lot of attention recently, it's a nice boost for the image to be able to say that the owner of the company is actually Saudi Arabia. They make games, even though not really, that everyone around the world plays. Soft influences like these are definitely one of the goals. Now, there's one more part to this whole business side of the operation that amazes me. Do you know that EA is actually self-buying out itself in a large portion of the deal? If you look through the announcements, it's mentioned very openly that the transaction will be funded by a combination of cash from each of PIF, Silver Lake and Affinity Partners, as well as rollover of PIF's existing stake in EA, constituting an equity investment of approximately $36 billion and $20 billion of debt financing fully and solely committed by JP Morgan Chase Bank. This is an important bit because it means that by going private, EA is taking upon itself $20 billion of debt. You might ask, why should we care? Well, the debt has to be paid off, which means that they need to make money to do that, and where does that come from? Again, by cutting costs, which comes back to restructuring the company, most probably layoffs. Then it's about abandoning some of the projects that the company was already working on and maybe even closing down some studios completely. Because why would you invest in a product in which the potential revenue is not satisfying enough to meet the new internal targets? I mean, how can I now be sure that I will get another Mass Effect in the end? Seeing how the last Dragon Age performed, someone might decide it's not worth the risk and just cancel the whole project. And the project here being BioWare. They don't have a really great track record recently with the Veilguard and Anthem, despite my huge nostalgia for the studio's games. I mean, I am a bit worried for them. And like I mentioned, there's definitely an expected increase in revenue, and that might come through even more intense focus on live service games, so suddenly the goal might not be to have it at 74%, but instead, let's say, 90%. Or in the worst case scenario, they might change their whole business model to games made according to the FC model, disregarding all the value that comes from single-player titles like the Jedi series, even though it's well received by the players. Most probably, we will also have a more intense focus on monetization in the games that already bring a lot of money to the company. If it makes X amount of money, why can't it make X plus 10%? I'm afraid that if we thought that things like Ultimate Team are expensive now, they're going to get even more expensive, and we'll see the process of turning EA's other franchises into cash cows like this one. Everything just to put the company out of debt as quickly as possible. Remember this report that Battlefield 6 was internally targeted to reach 100 million players? Well, with the Battle Royale mode coming as a free-to-play mode shortly after the base game's release, it's certainly a vision. We'll see how the monetization in this one is going to look like, but in the end, if Battle Royale makes a lot of cash and the base Battlefield 6 is looking really bad in comparison, then the focus with the franchise might shift somewhere else than it is right now. And finally, there's obviously the social and political aspect of the new ownership. I don't want to get too deep into this because I'm not interested in taking sides in this argument, but let me say this. While a publicly traded company might be presenting its stance on things like inclusivity, diversity, and equality based on their own decisions, and never mind what are the underlying reasons for it, whether it's true belief, trends, or even business appeal of such a decision, well, the upcoming situation might be that they have no decision to make because the owners will decide which course of action to take. And while we do see a certain degree of liberalization happening in Saudi Arabia, it's a very controlled process, and I expect their mindset and values to spill over in time to all the companies that the PIF owns around the world. However, I need to say this as well. The Public Investment Fund holds a majority stake in the Japanese studio SNK, famous for their series like Fatal Fury or Metal Slug. In an interview with Video Games Chronicle, the producer from the studio openly stated that the PIF has no effect on their creative output and that they have full freedom on what they want to create. And this could potentially give a certain degree of reassurance to fans who are worried about their beloved franchises being forced to change under the new leadership. But in all fairness, we just have to wait and see what happens in the next few years, since the situation with EA is a bit different. Okay, so to sum things up, should we, as players, start to panic? No, I don't think so, but I think we need to pay close attention to what's happening with EA Games. Challenge everything. Once the deal goes through. I'm mostly worried that a lot of talented people will be fired due to cost cutting, and some great projects still in development will be cancelled strictly because of the new financial situation. Unfortunately, I can imagine a future in which teams like Hazelight Studios are never given a chance by EA because their projects sound too risky. And we know well enough now that giving them a chance with A Way Out was a great move, which then resulted in further development of both critically acclaimed and business sound games like It Takes Two and Split fiction. So I think programs like EA Originals are at risk, studios like BioWare might suddenly find themselves under very watchful eyes, and games that bring the most revenue might be forced to bring even more money, and that usually means making the gaming experience worse for people who are not paying anything on top of the initial cost of the game.
When you are 6 hours into playing Battlefield and you run out of ammo in your clip, and we ask you for $1 to reload, you're really not very price sensitive at that point in time.
Oh, and remember when I mentioned Scopely? Since the PIF already has that, there's a big chance that IPs that belong to EA might get more presence on mobiles, especially since EA's own attempts with Battlefield or Apex didn't really work out. All of that might not happen instantly, but that's why it will be interesting to observe what happens with EA in the near future. It all sounds very dark, but the current state of the gaming industry when it comes to people and creativity with huge companies leaves a lot to be desired, and this kind of buyout on such a corporate level doesn't really convince me that this deal is about the good of the players.
Every time you sift through some level of information, or you have to try and think about how to move some initiative forward, ask yourself this question first. Is this good for the player?
It's always about making more money, diversifying income sources, and this time it's also about changing public image of a certain very rich spot on the world map. But you know what? I really hope I'm wrong. I would love to get lots of great Battlefield games, continue my journey with Mass Effect with the next installment in the series, and keep getting games from Josef Fares' crazy and enthusiastic mind. Despite all that is wrong with EA's business model, there are still some highlights I enjoy, and it would be a shame to lose them. And one more thing that F-Squared analyst told in an interview with Ars Technica is that to work through the debt of this scale, apart from layoffs and studio closures, it might mean selling IPs owned by EA. So maybe someone will be willing to buy back something from a drawer full of dust, and we might actually get new games in long-forgotten beloved franchises. I mean, it would be cool, but only time will tell. Thank you for watching. Take care.